So now the ignition assembly is out of the vehicle, we need to remove this roll pin. The roll pin's sticking out just enough so that we can use a roll pin removal tool. If it was not sticking out enough, we would have to drill somewhere around the roll pin to be able to get underneath it to pry it out. Using the reference chart, you would determine which one of these jigs to use and then install it. And what this tool does is that split right there is going to go over the top of the roll pin. This tube is going to slide on top of it, squeeze that together, pinch the roll pin, and we should be able to pull it out. Once we get it started, tap this into place and make sure it's seated all the way down. Rotate the thumb turn until it comes to a stop, and then tighten the set screw to clamp the two pieces together. It's generally a good idea to hold the ignition cylinder in a little bit as you rotate the thumb turn back out to remove the set screw. When the roll pin is removed, the ignition cylinder pops out of the assembly. Now we can go ahead and remove the jig from the assembly. And often this will grab the roll pin and pull it out, and the pin will be here, and you just remove it from here. In this case, the pin's still sitting there. So, the pin is still in the ignition assembly, which is fine. Now that we have our ignition assembly out, going to disassemble it. It's a good idea to confirm the code that's on the ignition cylinder before cutting the keys. Codes on these external 4-track cylinders are laser etched on, and sometimes they're extremely difficult to read. There are several techniques you can use to be able to make it a little more visible. They don't always work. So this is one of them. Using a permanent marker will help fill in where the laser etching was done and can give you some contrast between the laser etching and the rest of the cylinder to be able to read. But this one, it just didn't get etched onto the cylinder enough. It's not in there at all. My code's just non-existent. We'll be able to actually confirm the code by looking at the wafers when we pull them out. All right, now we have another roll pin here. Fortunately, this is not a blind roll pin, but there are other issues that we may run into. So there's a roll pin here.
Okay, start again.
There's a roll pin right here that holds this retainer on. And you don't want to put these cylinders or ignition assemblies in a vise. Will destroy them. Here's the problem with removing this roll pin. This roll pin is now up against the key buzzer. If you can get the cylinder to turn one last time, you can get that out. Otherwise, we're going to have to remove this and drill a small hole in the key buzzer so that we can drive the pin the rest of the way out. Inserting the key, binding it a little to the right, a little to the left, a couple of times. Sometimes you can get it to turn one last time. Sometimes you can't. So what we're going to do to get this roll pin out is drill a small hole right here. And then we'll be able to continue to drive that roll pin out of the back of the plug. Anytime you're drilling, you should always drill a pilot hole. You want to drill a hole that's smaller than your final bit size. And you can see the hole that's drilled, the path that we were able to drive that roll pin through. Now we can remove the plug retainer, and now we should be able to remove the plug from the cylinder housing. Now that we have the plug out, ignoring all the graphite that shouldn't be there, actually I already cleaned a lot of graphite out of this lock. Someone was really trying to get this thing to work. Of course, graphite is one of the worst things they could have done. That one wafer is why this plug would not turn and why this lock would not work. When you remove the key from this plug, you need to have the wafers that are facing down, you need to hold them in place because they will fall out. And you want to remove these in order. And note, there is one position that's missing here. You will generally see there's at least one wafer that's not in the cylinder. Sometimes it's more than one. But in this one, that one is missing. And when you reassemble it, you only want to put in the wafer positions you've removed. Laying them out in order. And then rotate the plug and remove the rest of the wafers, laying them out in order. Generally, you don't have to scrub the plug. You can generally just spray it with degreaser, and that's sufficient. But in this case, with all the graphite that someone was using to try and make this cylinder work, we want to get as much off of it as possible. Sometimes on these plugs there is damage in these channels where the wafers and springs go in, especially towards the front of the cylinder. These might be damaged, you might have to file them to clean it up, but most of the time this is fine. The plug is fine. However, in the cylinder housing, as always, when you're cleaning any parts, you never want to do it over a trash can. Do it over the workbench, do it over the floor, close to the floor, so if parts do fall out, you can find them. If you do it over the trash can, it may be extremely difficult to find any small parts that fall out. So there is damage inside of the cylinder housing. This is normal when these fail. That needs to be filed down. All those burrs need to be removed. We're trying to round it over and remove the burrs. Start with the file at 90 degrees to the edge of the channel. As you're moving the file back and forth, you want to rotate the file across so you round over and take off those burrs. That needs to be done with every part of this housing. You can look and feel to make sure that those burrs are gone. On these Honda external 4-track cylinders, all of the wafers are stamped with the depth number. I'm trying to read the numbers that are stamped on the wafers because we need to pull out replacement wafers. Now that everything's been repaired, it's time to reassemble with new wafers. So these are the wafers we removed. We have new wafers here that are exact replacements. The only thing that we are going to reuse the springs. They're generally something that can be reused. If you feel they need to be discarded, there are replacement springs in the pinning kit. Or if they get lost, which is something that never happens in locksmithing. You don't lose small parts. And once you have wafers in the first side of the plug, you can insert the key. Make sure that they're all the correct wafers. They all line up at the flush line on both sides. Then you can rotate the plug and hold those wafers into place on the bottom as you remove the key. And while you're holding those wafers in place, put the wafers in on the other side. All right, all of the wafers are back in the plug, ready for reassembly. First, a small amount of lubricant. Test it, make sure it's working well. The retainer goes back on, and then the roll pin for the retainer. And the roll pin, when it's in, should be equal distance sticking out of both sides. And reassemble the key buzzer. Test again. Now we should be able to reinsert it into the housing. I generally need to hold in the steering lock as you go to insert the plug into the ignition assembly. Once you get the plug into the assembly, you want to test it before you reinsert the roll pin. And see, it's not working, it's not turning. So that means that it needs to come out and be reinserted. Holding it into place, I'm testing it. It's retracting the steering lock. It's rotating, so I know it's working correctly. Now I can put the roll pin back into place so that the cylinder is secure in the housing. Test it once more. Make sure the roll pin is secure. This ignition assembly cylinder has been repaired, ignition assembly has been reassembled, and it's ready to reinstall.